Welcome to lesson 3. Today we're going to be looking at for loops. So, why do we need for loops? Well, we use for loops to reduce unnecessary code and to clean up programs. And it's usually used in places where we want to do the same function more than one time. For example, we have a for loop printing the numbers 1 through 10 with the range function, which we'll get into later. And then we also have a list here, and the for loop runs through all of the elements in that list and it prints them. So these both shorten code because in this place, instead of physically printing the numbers 1 through 10, you can just use a for loop. And in this case, instead of printing each element of the list, we can use a for loop. So this is an example of looping through strings with for loops. So each string is iterable, which means each letter in the string can be viewed as a different object. So if we use a for loop for I in pen, each letter will be assigned to I for each run in the loop, and it will print. So let's look at what lists are. Lists store multiple things in a single variable, and a list is defined with similar to a variable with an equal sign with its elements enclosed in square brackets. And lists are ordered, which means the elements have an order number, which is in list indexing. And lists are also changeable, which means the elements are changeable and you can append things to lists. So in list, duplication elements are also allowed. So for example, in this list, I have item 1, 2, and 3. If I add another item 1, it won't do anything to the list. Lists can store multiple data types, so not only strings, but you can store strings, variables, booleans, and floats in the same list. List indexing. So every list is ordered, as I said, and each list is indexed. So this first value will have the index of 0. Then the next value will have the index of 1, then 2, and so on. And each value is separated by a comma. So this is the first, this is the second, and this is the third. In indexing, it's 0, 1, and 2. So let's look at this basic list, and when it prints out, it simply prints out the entire list as it is. So changing lists. We're taking the same list again, and then we're using indexing to change the value of item 3. So my list, and then in square brackets 2. This means we're bringing up the third term in the list because it goes 0, 1, 2. So that's term 3 in the list. And we're changing its value to this string, change 1. Then once we print again, we can see down here that the item 3 changed to change 1. And we can also use this dot append function with a string inside or anything inside to append another value to the list. So as we can see, when we print again, there's another value at the end of the list. Duplicates in lists. So again, in this, item 1 is duplicated 3 times, however, there's no problem in the list. So let's go back to for loops and look at printing each item in a list. So these are the 3 names in the list, and for name and names, in the for loop, for name in names, print name. So what this will basically do is it'll go through each item in the list and it'll print it out. So let's break down the syntax a little bit. This for is just the way to start a for loop, and then the name can be anything. It can be a letter, it can be a word, but it cannot be a number. So it can be for I in names, for X in names, for name in names, however you would like to name it. It stays the same. But this is basically the variable that stores which value of the list or which number of the range function we're on currently. And then for name in names, so in the list name, so it'll go through all these. And again, the name is the variable storing the current value. So if it's Ishan, it'll print Ishan. Then the loop will run again, go to the next one, Adam, print Adam, loop again, go to the next one, and print John. So let's look at the range function with lists. So the range function runs the code a specific number of times, and it returns numbers with the default starting at 0 and incrementing at 1. So the range function is when you do not have a list or a string that you want to run through, but you want to run a certain code a certain number of times. So again, with the range function, you have that I or X variable, which stores the number, and those numbers start from 0 and keep incrementing at 1. And there can be manipulations to the range function, such as you can manipulate the starting value. You can also manipulate the amount it's incremented by, changing it from 1 to something else. And you can also manipulate the ending value, or till when the loop runs to. So let's look at some range function examples. This first one is the simplest form of the range function. This is the syntax of the range function. So it has range and then in brackets and a number. So this number, for example, is 6. So what this will do is, starting at 0, incrementing at 1, it will print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And since it starts at 0, it prints 6 numbers. So 0 to 5, it doesn't include 6, right? So if you wanted to print, for example, numbers 0 through 6, then you should put for I in range 7. Now this down here is changing the starting value. So this will do the same thing, except it'll print numbers from 2 to 6, excluding 6. So it'll print 2, 3, 4, 5. So for example, if you wanted to print numbers 1 to 10, like we saw in the first slide, you would write for I in range 1, 11. So it starts at 1 and ends at 10 because it's not including 11. And this jumps in whole numbers unless you specify so. So in this last one, you change the amount it's incremented by. So after the second comma, the third value here is how much it increments by. So this one will start at 2 and will jump up by 2 every time, all the way until 10, but not including 10. So it'll go 2, 4, 6, and 8. Next, let's look at this handy little operator, which is the plus equal to operator, which is extremely useful, and we will use it in the future for things like keeping score or keeping count while using the for loop. So the plus equal to operator shortens code, and it also works with all other operators. So it doesn't really need to be plus equal to, it can also be minus equal to or multiply equal to. So let's look at an example here. So if the word is hello and we want to count the letters in the word, a way to do this with the for loop is for letter, or this letter could be an I, in word, count, which is the variable we started here at 0, equals count plus 1. So it goes through every letter in this word, and each time it adds 1 to the count. So for this word, hello, the count would be 5. So a way to shorten this using the plus equal to operator is to simply do count plus equal to 1 inside the for loop. So what this does is basically emulates count equal to count plus 1, except in a shorter value. So if this was count minus equal to 1, it would be count would be decreasing every time. And this can also be with any other number than 1, such as it can be 2, 0.5, or anything else. So that is it for loops, and in the next video we'll be looking at while loops.